Hello Legion, this is Hadrian. Thank you for being here, and welcome to part 2 of a short series overviewing the upcoming Stellaris Apocalypse expansion and accompanying 2.0 update, codenamed Cherryh. If you missed the last video, this is what we know so far. Stellaris, as we know it, is about to change. Completely. This is a list of the features Apocalypse and Cherryh will bring to Stellaris as of the Apocalypse announcement. Apocalypse is adding some truly devastating new weaponry with which to wage total annihilation on enemy empires. And the 2.0 update upends most of Stellaris core gameplay systems with all new or entirely different mechanics. So much so that we need more than just one video to break it down and talk about it. Here's what we're covering in part 2. Note the timestamps by each topic so you can jump to the portion of the video where I cover the topic you care about most. And actually, I have to break this up even more for this video. The DOOMSTACK topic is so huge that it's like a fourth discussion point, so here's what the topics really look like. As soon as they're available, links to future videos in this series are in the upper right corner, as well as in the description below. And of course, each of these points corresponds to a particular dev diary, which is also linked in the description below. So if you're intrigued by a certain change or just want to know every last little detail, check out the associated diary for that topic. And because these dev diaries are so dense with changes, all of this video's topics contain a bit of a bonus topic tied to each main focal point. So you'll want to stay tuned in throughout the video if you want to get all the details. So let's jump back into it. In the 2.0 Cherryh update, surveying the planets of neighboring empires is going to work a bit differently. Not only will encountering an empire and opening communications for the first time automatically reveal the full extent of the territory within your borders to one another and consider that territory surveyed per the game, but terra incognita, which is the term for dark, grayed out portions of the map that you haven't ever seen before, will permanently peel back when this happens. So you no longer have to explore systems that have already been explored by another player, and thus will not grant you any anomalies even if you did explore them. And this change will also make the galactic map appear less washed out, as any empire you've encountered will be completely and immediately unshrouded. Note that this does not grant active sensor links, and the sensor link trade is still a separate option on the trade screen. You won't be able to see what's going on in those newly revealed systems, of course, but you will receive basic astronomical information on other empires as soon as you encounter them. Speaking of the trade screen, star chart trading has been removed from the game as well. You can now trade communications with another empire, automatically putting you in touch with any empires they've met that you haven't. So let me say this again, because this is actually kind of a lot. Meeting other empires will automatically reveal all of their controlled territory and roll back the terra incognita even on systems you haven't physically visited yet. Terra incognita used to be based purely on what your ships had touched and what they'd explored, right? You won't be able to see what's going on unless you have a sensor link, but you no longer have to explore systems that have already been scoured for anomalies by another player before you. Trading communications will expand this exchange of revealed territory to any empire that either side of the communications trade has met that the other side has not. This is a bit more of an interesting change, in that Wiz has teased it as the beginnings of a future espionage system at some point after the 2.0 update. After all, you might be wondering why you'd have no control over whether another empire puts you in touch with and reveals your territory to a neighbor you're not interested in meeting yet. The answer, satisfying or not, seems to be that this is how the system is going to work for now, and having that kind of control over information and what gets spread goes great with, say, a spying system, which Stellaris currently doesn't have but might in the future. Not as part of Cherryh, but they're building a foundation here. Also, Fallen Empire territory will still be able to yield anomalies even after being surveyed. Of course, all of these changes are still being worked on, so there's still the chance that community or internal feedback will result in some of the content of these videos not being reflected in the final release. It's par for the course. In other news, here's a bonus item for you, actually. If you're more of a holdout when it comes to your gaming purchases in general, and so maybe you haven't quite gotten on board the Stellaris expansion wagon at all yet, and by that I mean you only have the base game, no story packs, no Utopia, you may be grateful to hear that as of the 2.0 update, Ascension perks will be formally added to the core Stellaris experience, except for the Ascension Path and Megastructure perks that are specifically tied to Utopia features. Some players have argued that this slightly devalues the Utopia expansion for those who bought it prior to 2.0, but there is still a wealth of content such as megastructures, habitat stations, indoctrination, and advanced forms of both slavery and government that are unique to Utopia. There are thus a few different sides to that discussion going on, so you can feel free to sound off in the comments below if you would like to. Next up is a much meatier and more highly anticipated dev diary. I'll tackle this two-parter mid-video so we can wind down with technological updates, which sound really promising, something to be excited about for the end of this one. But before we get to the big part of this two-parter, changes to the ship design system. After that, the long-awaited DOOMSTACKS solution. First, here's what's new in ship creation. Ship reactors will now be a single system, much like FTL drive, engines, sensors, and combat computers. You won't be having to plug multiple reactors into the bottom slots anymore. They'll be over on the right-hand side. And the amount of output from your reactor will depend on the reactor's level, technology level, and the class of ship to which you're outfitting that reactor. A new auxiliary item called a reactor booster has been added to grant minor power boosts when you want to keep all your non-auxiliary components on the cutting edge of available tech, if you can. These are available from the outset of the game and can be upgraded with further research as well. There have been some pretty substantial overhauls to armor and shields in addition to the above. As most experienced Stellaris players know at present, and as the dev diary corresponding to these updates actually notes specifically, how to distribute armor and shields is mostly a matter of remembering to put more armor on your big ships while worrying less about it, or not at all, on the smaller ships. What it comes down to is that in the current version of the game, armor's old, quote-unquote, damage reduction formula scaled to ship size, and the amount of damage reduction by armor on smaller ships was, as a consequence, just negligible. It didn't really count. No more. Once Cherryh launches, each point of armor will essentially be an additional hit point for the ship, a literal padding to the hull's core hit points, just like you might expect. Armor will now have its own health bar, like hull and shields, and different types of weapons will still be more advantageous versus armor as opposed to shields and vice versa, and armor will still not require any power, so there's an advantage to foregoing shields if you're up against an opponent that's not using energy weapons. That's staying the same. Furthermore though, with enough added shields and armor, ships will now be able to effectively double their hit points, so shields and armor are going to be more effective overall going forward. Moving on, it's not time to talk about DOOMSTACKS just yet. Strap in, missile fanatics, because torpedo slots are soon to be the only home for missiles going forward. Yes, you heard that right. All missile types will now bypass shields completely, however, without exception. In a related change, ships will now lose speed and combat ability by up to 50% when heavily damaged, so this helps the Cherryh update in an overall effort to reduce the prevalence of missile-laden deathboats and turn them into a weapon that's designed to kind of soften up the enemy by going straight through those shields and softening up the armor and the hull of the ships, even when there might still be shields with hit points remaining. Don't worry, torpedo chassis will be available from the start of the game to accommodate this change and allow true missile addicts to feed their cravings. Also, in a similar change but in the opposite direction, energy torpedoes are now large slot weapons like kinetic artillery, so these slot-type shenanigans go both ways. Still not time for DOOMSTACKS yet. Custom combat computers are back. Like in earlier versions of the game, combat computers are no longer strictly limited to ship class, but are still not completely unrestricted either. This means that any ship, from Corvette all the way up to Titan, oh yes, I said Titan, more on that next video, can be programmed with swarm, picket, line ship, and artillery behaviors, which also means that the computer you choose will be an important strategic choice depending on how you've designed your vessels. Again, the four possible options are swarm, picket, line ship, and artillery. However, remember that there are still limitations. While there are 4 total combat computer options, there are limits on each ship class as to which combat computer will be available to you. There is no such thing, for instance, as an artillery corvette. Finally, once certain technology has been researched, war doctrines will now be available to players, allowing you to set empire policies that grant bonuses to your fleets based on the kind of fighting position your empire is currently in. Because these are policy choices, they can only be changed so often, and thus will become a helpful and also significant tactical choice as you find yourself on the winning or losing side of a war. So, DOOMSTACKS. The short way to describe the DOOMSTACK problem is just to watch the background of this video, or the last one if you like, both of which prominently feature some decently sized DOOMSTACKS. In the current version of Stellaris, and for the game's history up to this point, one way to greatly increase your odds of success in combat is to throw your entire fleet at your enemy's entire fleet all in one massive battle. It's epic, it can look really pretty, and you might feel pretty awesome once your fleet gets this big, but it's an awfully one-dimensional way to look at fleet victory in Stellaris. Another way to illustrate this problem is if I just tell you that I've had commenters on my series genuinely tell me to combine my 2 large fleets into one fleet so that I would have a chance at winning the war better than what I had right now. Never mind the fact that the 2 fleets were split into 2 for the purposes of fighting a single enemy on 2 fronts, and they were more than up to their respective tasks without being combined. They were more than big enough. But there exists in the Stellaris community a general sense that big fleet, best fleet. So much so that players will forego thinking about sensible tactical decisions in favor of kill, dismember, maim, doomstack. Wiz wrote up a threefold solution. I'm going to do my best to describe it in my own words, but I strongly encourage you to check out the dev diary for yourself once you're done listening to this, and then read how he put it too. Trying to get your head around the three main problems he outlined and the three solutions he proposed takes time and ideally discussion, because some of them kind of might be confusing or might even be upsetting or rub you the wrong way, or just, it's good to think about it. So have a listen, have a read, check the comments, leave one if you like, and let's all get our heads around this together. Problem number 1. As a result of the big fleet, best fleet mantra, lesser fleets almost always take disproportionate casualties. The current pre-2.0 combat math swings the advantage so far in favor of DOOMSTACKS that even well-led smaller fleets with good admiral characters, don't stand a chance against larger fleets. And at the same time, in those battles, the Doomstack will barely take any punishment for picking on the little guy. The solution is called the Force Disparity Combat Bonus. In simple terms, this means that smaller forces in 2.0 engaging larger forces will receive a combat boost. Importantly, this is not designed to level the playing field completely, where's the fun in that, but simply to tip it a little bit closer to level. The bigger fleet remains more likely to win a battle, but will pay a higher price for not picking on someone their own size. Problem number 2, Doomstacks are made further useful in the current version of Stellaris because when you manage to track down the enemy's main force using a Doomstack strategy, you can usually more or less decide the war right then and there. The reason being that ships in Stellaris fight to the death unless you tell them to run. Why not use Doomstacks in those circumstances? It's the instinctively correct choice, but it's far less strategically satisfying than a game like Stellaris deserves. This has been addressed by the introduction of random ship disengagement. Ships below 50% health will be able to disengage from battle at random. Disengaged ships can no longer be harmed or harm other ships, and entirely disengaged fleets, in other words, fleets that have completely lost a battle such that every single ship has either been destroyed or has disengaged, will make an automatic emergency jump and take damage in the same way you would emergency jump manually out of a sticky situation. But the key difference is that there is now a random element of disengagement that helps ensure every single battle in Stellaris will play out much more uniquely, and very few will result in the outright guaranteed slaughters that accompany a Doomstack strategy. Problem number 3, the last one. Admirals aren't important enough. Most empires only have one, maybe two, and you know it's true. And when you think about it, I mean, shouldn't there be more, especially if you have a massive empire with lots of ships? But of course, when you can Doomstack, even with that massive galaxy-devouring empire of yours, all you need is the one fleet leader, which is just bad. Pay close attention to this solution in particular, because of the three, this one has caused, I think, the most discord, unless I've missed something. And I may just be one guy, but in my opinion, it's mostly misunderstanding and misinterpretation. Totally innocent, happens all the time, and I don't blame people for being defensive given what this is going to sound like, but the solution makes sense from a gameplay and even from a roleplay perspective. If you're in another camp from me, let's talk about it in the comments below. First though, let me try to explain and put it plainly. The solution to problem 3 is command limit, which is, as of now, a hard cap on how big each fleet can be in your empire, which could eventually become a soft cap as well. They're still working on how this is going to be designed in the final version. Command limit is a gameplay expression of the idea that any one leader can only effectively lend their bonuses and leadership to so many ships at a time. Admiral skill does not affect command limit, it's purely technology driven and tradition driven. So while at first pass this may sound like a simple, well, your fleets can only be so big, ha, Doomstack problem solved, there are a bunch of other changes in addition to the other two I've just mentioned, and this one, which will help put this change in an entirely new light. Players, or so the developers are hoping, will now more naturally gravitate towards multiple smaller fleets and multiple admirals in a way that feels right and feels hopefully better than the Doomstack approach. And that's the tripartite Doomstack solution. Now, talk to me. What are your thoughts? Let's have some civil discussion in the comments below so we can help each other understand these changes, why they may be good and why they may be bad. Or, you know, wait and talk to me when I'm done going over this last thing. I'm going to wrap part 2 of my Apocalypse overview by going over some exciting changes to technology in the Cherryh update. All empires will now start with access to every basic weapon type. Lasers, missiles, mass drivers, all of them, as well as deflectors and armor. They'll all be researched and be accessible from the very beginning. Primarily, this is to allow you to make more meaningful ship design choices right away, so that there's more variety between playthroughs from the very first galactic day of a new save. In an effort to smooth out technological progression afterward and over the course of a game, there are now 5 tech tiers instead of just 4. The example given in the dev diary was how common it is for cold fusion reactors to show up right after you finish researching fusion. More tech tiers and more evenly distributed technologies should attenuate this issue a little bit and kind of space out those upgrades from one another to where you really end up kind of starting to anticipate the next level a little bit more before you can get to it. Furthermore, a quote, large number of new technologies, end quote, have been added to all of those levels, so expect even more nuance and depth to the research system as you progress through a game of Stellaris. Most enticing, though, about the tech changes is that the amount of improvement from one iteration of a technology to the next most advanced has been scaled upward, so that you can really feel more than before the impact of each upgrade, be it to those nice new lasers you just figured out, or to the revolution in armor technology your engineering researcher just delivered. And there is in fact a Tier 6 as well, reserved exclusively for fallen empires, and player obtainable only through salvaged shipwrecks. Lastly for this dev diary, and this is a pretty exciting under-the-hood change, even if it doesn't make much sense to newer players who are still learning the game, the costs of technologies and population-based research rate penalties are being redone in Cherryh as well. Basically, the developers felt that the current system punishes players who play the game wide too much by too drastically slowing the rate of late-game research when you have a massive population in your empire. So population doesn't matter anymore. It's just going to be based on planet count. Put simply, this tilts the playing field slightly more towards wide play versus tall play, while still providing the research speed advantage to the expansion-conscious tall player, as the system is already designed to do. Good stuff. And that's all for this part of the series. Stay tuned for part 3 in the coming days, and look out for further updates beyond those as the as-yet undated Apocalypse expansion gets closer to release. Thanks for watching. If you enjoyed it, don't forget to like the video and subscribe to follow along. In the next episode, we'll take a look at all new ground combat mechanics, a shiny new fleet manager interface, and a little afterthought of a topic. Definitely the least exciting change and probably not of interest to most of you, really, but I thought I'd mention it. Planet killers. I don't know. If just one person wants to know about it, that's good enough, I suppose. Don't forget to check the description for links to the associated dev diaries. Comments are always welcome. Let me know what you think, and I'll see you next time.